Hi everyone. So welcome to the family. We're really glad to have the founders of Circle today for their launch in France. It's a great product that you're all gonna love using. Plus, their story is worth sharing. Sean, Jeremy, welcome on stage. Thank you for being here. So some background about you two. So Jeremy Allaire, co-founder of two startups, Allaire Corp that he IPO'd in '99, and then Brightcove that IPO'd also not long ago. And Sean, experienced software developer, you've been a CEO also. The two of you worked before at Brightcove, and you decided to start Circle together a couple of years ago. You both have a very experienced background as entrepreneurs. How did you decide to go the entrepreneurship road again, and what kind of vision made you start Circle?
Sure. Well, first, thanks for coming out for our launch in France. Appreciate it. Hopefully you guys enjoy Circle. I'll start and Sean can add on. So we started this company about 4.5 years ago, and as noted in the introduction, I was CEO of a public company called Brightcove. We had gone public in early 2012 in the online video space. And about 5 years ago, roughly, both of us got exposed to cryptocurrency. And as a technology, as a new economic incentive mechanism, and we're both extremely excited about it. And I think at that time, and right before we started the company, we really reached the conclusion that sort of a new layer of protocols was emerging for the internet that would allow storing value, transmitting value, exchanging value to become free and ubiquitous all around the world in the same way we can share information and communications. And when we looked at it, it was really clear that this infrastructure, this technology would have as large of an impact as something like the World Wide Web or other major internet protocol advancements. And we thought over the next 10 or 20 years, the impact of this, of what people call blockchain tech now, would probably be greater than the impact of the web, because it wasn't just about information and data exchange, it was about value exchange, and that was profound. And we wanted to work together again. We'd collaborated multiple times, and we wanted to work at this stage in our career on something that was, had a 10 or 20 year horizon and was really large in scale and scope, and this felt like a project that had all of those attributes. And at least for me personally, I had what people say gone down the rabbit hole of cryptocurrency, and I'm still down there. And so it just sucked me in, and it was very clear like there was a tremendous opportunity to build a global consumer company around it.
Yeah, I think we both got very excited about the idea of there being some kind of a global standard connectivity for people everywhere in the world of finance, like there already is with content and media and publishing, and that's not necessarily a new idea. I think those are some of the ideas that the web was born with, which is this idea that we should all be connected, and it shouldn't cost us any money to update data, which is all that sending money really is updating the databases that hold the money. And that should just be something that's free for anybody who has a mobile device. We should be able to plug into sending euros to somebody next to us or across the seas who receives it maybe as rupees in India. And that should just happen safely and instantly and not cost anybody any money. And all the euros I send should arrive on the other side. And those things already happen with text messages and sharing photos and publishing opinions. But it doesn't yet happen in finance. So when we looked at things like blockchain architectures and specific implementations like Bitcoin and crypto assets as new economic incentives, we started to look at those things as really powerful enabling technologies that had a number of advantages. For example, contracts and agreements that could be written in software code rather than having to pay human beings to enforce them after the fact, and safer means of settlement globally that were interoperable, approaching something like an HTTPS for value exchange, which nobody controls HTTPS. Google doesn't own the web, it participates in it. And so we started to see things like that happen on the technical side, as well as new economic incentives in the form of crypto assets for financial institutions and service providers to benefit from those things without having to fall back on just charging margins and fees and all the old ways of doing business in that space. So it got us very excited, and obviously here we are 4.5 years later, and we feel like we're just still getting started. Here being in France today is, it's a major step forward. We still feel like we have a lot more to do, but we're well on our way.
So you started by enabling anyone to exchange Bitcoin at the very beginning, and today you have what you call a new UX for money, which is sending fiat to fiat completely seamlessly. Why did you make the choice to leave the crypto completely hidden from the public?
Sure, I can take part of that. So when we got started, the vision from day one was that we wanted people to be able to beam or send and receive existing forms of money, but in a purely digital way, with the sort of same speed and user experience as they have with things like email and text. And our belief was not that all of a sudden all of the people in Europe and all of the people in the United States and all of the people in China would all of a sudden replace euros and dollars and RMB with Bitcoin. That was not something we believed. We have always looked at Bitcoin as a kind of digital commodity. It's an incentive system for a protocol and a network, and it behaves like a commodity. And you can transmit value using it, of course. But our view is that in major societies, they would want to use the same currency that they're paid in and that they pay their taxes in and so on. But in order to get the system that we wanted to build working, we needed to be able to have the ability to hold dollars and euros and pounds and other currencies, and we needed to have the ability to exchange them with digital currency. And in order to do that, we needed to be licensed by the government to hold government-issued money and to be able to transmit government-issued money. There are regulations for that. So we had to go convince the government that we could do this safely and not allow criminals to control this or to protect consumers from fraud, the reasons you have to get a government license. And that took us about 2.5 years and almost 3 years to get the licenses across the US, UK, and then for EU-wide operations. And we didn't want to just sit there for 3 years and not have any product available to anyone. And so we decided to introduce some things that would work. It wouldn't be the full vision of what we wanted to deliver to the market, but it would allow us to test out and iterate different ideas. I don't know if you want to add to that.
Yeah, there are a lot of entrepreneurs in the room. In a way, you can sort of simplify the choice, which is, do we wait 3 years to deliver the perfect product that we want with payments, or do we release what we can now and learn and create our operations and set up a company and iterate on it? And that's ultimately what we decided to do. I would say, too, the other piece of that is we are long on the idea of crypto assets. That's a key piece of it. It's not just the technical improvements with things like blockchain. It really is the crypto asset piece. But not everyone needs to value that crypto asset. So if I'm back in the States and we're exchanging money back and forth, the two of us are exchanging money, I'm paying you back for a beer or whatever it may be. We don't necessarily want to buy Bitcoin at that time. We're just trying to send some money. So there may be Bitcoin involved in how we make things work and how we're able to make it free. And that way does involve the market valuing Bitcoin and crypto assets, but between the two of us in terms of a payment, that's what sort of fades into the background, and that's the experience that we want in our payment product.
Blockchain is one of the new tech that enabled Circle to exist. You also mentioned in some articles the rise of AI to do KYC and to be actually compliant with regulation. So I'd like to know how it affected your business, how complicated it is, and maybe for other entrepreneurs that didn't experience being in sales for 2 years, how do you know you're on the right track when you're actually building it?
Yeah, so one of the reasons that we felt like now it was becoming possible to create this open protocol for value exchange is not just blockchain technology itself, but also advancements in other areas like using machine learning and applied AI techniques to avoid the need to have thousands of human beings monitor transactions, or the sort of Western Union model of how you monitor transactions, and have a system where the machine could increasingly be smarter and smarter about policing those same transactions. And it's by policing them, it's things like preventing money laundering from happening, or looking at an enormous set of data points to see whether an identity may be stolen. So those data points include things like where has this device been seen used before? What is the debit card's history loosely that has been associated with this account? Does Facebook think this is a real human being or a bot? And financial velocity, how quickly the spins are occurring, all of these different sort of thousands of data points. A machine can pull those in and very quickly essentially give a credit score or some sort of decision over whether a payment or a transaction is likely to be fraudulent, is likely really to be the person executing it, that says that they're the ones who should be executing it. So that's what we built. It took some time to get it into place, and it's not visible. We hope it's not visible for most people as they see the kind of the tip of the iceberg. It's part of that giant piece of ice below the surface. But it's core intellectual property to how things work inside the system. It can be used for a lot of different things, but ultimately with payments, what it comes down to is we can use machine learning and applied AI to mitigate roughly 85% of the fraud or credit decisions that we need to make through the system. It can't make every decision, so we don't rely on AI for all of the decision making. There's a great deal more that is automated than may appear when things like identity verification is requested and someone needs to supply something like a government ID or a passport or a selfie so we can do some facial recognition. Most of that is automated. But there are cases that the machine can't reasonably handle, and so those are escalated to human beings. So it's not sort of an either or, does AI run everything or is it humans? It's a mix. And so we're able to have humans who are real specialists and experts who can help code the machine that is making most of the decisions, as well as handle the most difficult cases that the machine itself can't handle.
How do you know you're right on that path before launching a product?
How do we know we're right about what? Sorry?
About everything you're building and all the investments you're making in hiring this team and building these features before you actually have a product that exists.
Well, so one of the things that Sean just mentioned is we chose not to sort of be in stealth for years. We chose to introduce a product that had a very basic capability with a very narrow use case and then iterate every day and every day and every day, and to use data to inform the features that we needed to build that would make customers happy. So I think the process has been one of continuous software development, one of continued iteration, and one that's deeply, deeply data-driven in terms of what we have to build. There are other things like if we want to be available in France, we need banking partners for Euro, we need to have the government give us permission, we need to have people who work here, we need to have people who can answer the phones in French. Like those are clearly things that have to be done for a specific market. But for the fundamentals of the product, it's start simple and build something every day and use data to keep evolving it. So I think for us, it's just a very, very iterative, growth-driven, data-driven approach to building software.
I'll add just one quick point on that too. I would say it's really important, and many of the startup founders I'm sure know this, it's really important to figure out what are the metrics that you track, especially as you're iterating. What do you measure success against? Because the difficult case is not, okay, we picked this metric and we're failing to meet it, so we need to make a change or pivot if we can't make iterative changes, or we are hitting it and we need to go into growth modes. It's more, did we pick the right metric, or we think we picked the right metric and we're somewhere in the middle of success and failure, and so what does that mean exactly? It's those sort of difficult things to interpret. I think in fintech or financial services, an added wrinkle is you have almost an additional customer set of requirements that are coming through in the form of regulatory guidance, which is different than the web of content and publishing, because the World Wide Web is largely unregulated for the most part, say maybe China notwithstanding. But financial services, obviously that ship has sailed and it's heavily regulated, so you must comply. And so there's another sort of vector into the success metrics and what you can do in an iterative fashion while you're trying to service your customers.
You've always been pretty vocal about the need for regulation in the blockchain industry, especially like mentioning things like W3C for the web that could help bring regulation to blockchain all around. Is it still a position you hold today?
So I think there's two key things that we've talked about. So one is we have felt that it's appropriate that there be laws that protect consumers from fraud, or that there be laws that require people who handle money to attempt to stop criminal activity. So the need for laws around those things, it's a sort of the social obligations that go with money seem reasonable. I think the technology of crypto is obviously opens up new possibilities for fraud. It opens up new possibilities for criminals. And so you have to figure out, how do you deal with that? And it's appropriate for technology, the industry, and government to work together to figure out how to do that. And the answer isn't always the law that we have today is the right law for now. And there are new possibilities that emerge with the technology that we want to take advantage of that maybe the law didn't contemplate. So whether, it's reasonable to have these rules and to figure out how to apply them. And that's something we've been very clear about from when we started the company. The other, and frankly, that it's our job as technology innovators to educate government. It's our job to, as we like to say, walk in the front door, sit down with law enforcement, sit down with the financial regulators and educate them on this and remove the fear that exists and help them get excited about the economic possibilities, the possibilities for consumers, how this can improve the world, and get them comfortable that we're actually on the same side. We're not trying to fight them. Maybe there are people who are trying to fight them. We're not, right? We're trying to figure out how to do this in a fair way. So that's been an approach that we've taken, and I think that's been effective for us, and we have more licenses than any other crypto company in the world, and I think that's because we've been very progressive about working with the government. I think the second issue is, for just as long, we have said there needs to be more open standards processes and more governance processes around the development of the fundamental intellectual property that's involved in these. And we've been very vocal that those kinds of organizations are needed, that it can't just be, this group of developers who happen to have been working on this and have GitHub, pull request, capability that they get to determine the future of these. That I think ultimately, in something as important as value exchange, that these deserve to be worked on and collaborated on by computer scientists, by cryptographers, by academicians, by industry, in an open process. And so we've been advocating for that for a very long time. And the fact that there wasn't an open process in Bitcoin, I think, caused it to slow down the innovation. When we started the company 4.5 years ago, we were really excited about the idea that you could have something like Bitcoin become more extensible, so you could have other forms of crypto tokens that could run on top of it. We were really excited about different ideas that were being discussed around how to make it more scalable so you could have more volume throughput. We were excited about the idea of adding programming logic so you could build scriptable smart contracts that were tied to Bitcoin. But basically, there was no development that happened in those areas, or it was very, very slow. And I think the industry could have benefited from a more open development process. And I think that those things are starting to happen, though. I don't know if you want to add to that, Sean.
You're making all kinds of friends. Yeah, maybe just a couple quick points. I think on the first part, the regulatory, not the governance piece, on the regulatory piece, to be really honest, though, it can also be frustrating. We knew coming into starting this company that we would have to invest a lot of our time speaking to regulators and helping them advance, because it is frustrating when the spirit of a law, which is good, isn't really upheld in the letter of the law, and can often go the other way in a way that prevents innovation. And particularly when we started this, there were very few crypto-related companies that could even acquire a banking partner at all. And that's a hindrance to innovation. And so, I mean, I think there's a lot of room. It takes a long time, but there's a lot of room for the regulators to approve. It's not sort of binary. This is the law, and we all must adhere to this, because the letter of the law doesn't really address a lot of what we're trying to do. It doesn't take advantage of some of the opportunities that exist in the technology for things like a fully transparent, auditable ledger that we all have access to, that regulators have just as much access to as the rest of us. So the regulatory piece, I think, will change over time, and there are some regulators, believe it or not, who are really interested in learning a lot more about this and how do they get to that place where they can foster innovation. The governance bit is tricky, because just the really quick word on that is, when we were working on World Wide Web technologies, obviously there was the W3C, there's the IETF, there were even Sun and IBM, and there were sort of consortia of software vendors as well as academics, independent software developers, who all participated in a kind of time box debate that at the end of the debate, there was a decision and we could move forward with some sort of advancement. And that's how things like HTTP got created and implemented. Even when there were disagreements between, say, a Microsoft and a Netscape, at the end of the day, there was a standard, and it's benefited everybody. And that is, it's tricky to do in a consensus-based mechanism like some of the communities that we're working with today, but in some form of it needs to happen in order for the innovation to occur in a way that isn't controlled by this contingent, say a minor, or this contingent, which is just a group of people at a company that have the ability to approve PRs and get, or this community in academia. It needs to be everybody, and we don't yet have that. We haven't figured out that kind of process yet.
So your way to being secure about that is to edging yourself and being agnostic to the blockchain tech you're using?
I think in general you could say we're agnostic about the blockchain tech we're using. We are, we still operate with Bitcoin. We also use Ethereum. We have worked with the ERC20 tokens, something built on top of Ethereum. We're very wedded to the pattern and the idea that in order for a kind of a global standard for financial services to exist, it probably does require distributed ledgers, which probably are implemented in some form of blockchain pattern. But it's not to say that it has to be just Bitcoin or has to be Ethereum any more than, the World Wide Web isn't just Netscape or just Internet Explorer or just Chrome. It's the World Wide Web. And so we're sort of long on the idea of distributed ledgers, and crypto assets is a key piece of that, but not wedded to any one specific implementation today. I will say, though, that sounds like almost like a non-answer. Today, if we're going to write a layer atop one of these blockchain implementations, for several different reasons, the mature one to build on top of from a coding perspective is Ethereum.
So now that you're regulated in different regions of the world, especially France, which allows you to launch today, and that you use these distributed ledgers as some of your backbone to transfer value from one place to the other. It lets you deliver. One thing I found fascinating about the vision is this openness of the network that doesn't circle you, wrong word, into a private network. So if you were to use Venmo, you're tied to Venmo. And you can't do it cross-border. So I've heard you talk about what you think about the notion of cross-border and these two tech together.
Yeah, that's a great point. So, the vision we had and we've been executing is, again, how do we make money work the way that the rest of the internet works for consumers? So I want to be able to share value with another person the same way I could share a photo or share my opinion or send an email. And that means it needs to be borderless. It needs to be instant. It needs to cost nothing. And it should be fun, even. And it needs to be open. So this is a key idea, and this is what blockchain technology allows us to do. We don't want more of these walled gardens. That was the phrase people used in the early internet, of kind of these closed systems of access to content. We want there to be an open network so that if I use Circle and you use Alipay and another friend uses Venmo or another person uses Paytm in India, that we can just send payments to each other and share value with each other the same way we share content or messages or other things. Like, that is what we set out to build, is to be a participant in an open network that was a global ecosystem where we could all create these network effects for each other. And that would not just be consumer to consumer, that really would be any business in the world that wants to have a piece of software that allows them to collect cryptographic, digital payments, they should be able to do that the same way that they have a web server and can let people access their information or interact with them through a web server. And so we wanted that open model. So we built Circle entirely like that. And underneath the hood, you may just see, hey, I'm sharing some euros with my friends, or I'm sending euros to someone and they might be in the US or in England or another country, and the currency conversions are instant, the money availability is instant, the experience is just like you have with other forms of content. But it's been built to be open. And so we are in the early stages of turning on the protocols, those open protocols, so that other digital wallets anywhere in the world can connect and exchange value with Circle as well. And so that's going to be, I think, a very big part of the story of this whole industry, including Circle, later this year into next year and the years forward, is that we're going to leave behind proprietary closed systems of storing and transmitting money. And as I said, I think when we talked before, the whole idea of cross-border payments is going to look insane to all of us in 5 years. In the same way that if I said, when's the last time you sent a cross-border email or had a cross-border web browsing session, it makes no sense at all. So the idea of cross-border payments, the idea of this moving of money through these old systems will go away, and we're just going to live in this world of instant, open, global access and exchange of money. And so that's sort of the vision, and now we're just starting to realize those ideas in the marketplace.
It is indeed the first time I got to seamlessly send money to a friend that still lives in New York, and that just felt normal, but it was the first time.
Yeah, it's like you share a photo in iMessage, like you're not like which country are they in or which SMS provider are they using. It just works, right? So we're in the first stages of that at the mainstream consumer level, and we're very excited because we think that this is something that will take hold all around the world. And it's not just about one company. It's not just about Circle. It's about these networks being accessible all around the world. And so you'll see through the sort of protocols and APIs and innovations that we're doing on top of things like Ethereum, you're going to see more from us, which connects lots of different mainstream digital wallets around the world to this system.
You recently announced partnerships with wallets in Korea, I think, and in the Philippines.
Yeah, so we've been testing out some of these protocols that I'm referring to with companies in other markets. So one in Korea and one in the Philippines, and you can expect to see a lot more of those over time.
When you start working in a country and when you need to do these payments, you need a lot of access to traditional finance. So to have the liquidity, for example, when you do the money transfer, or just to have the partner that holds the risk. You've been working with Barclays in the UK, I think. So double questions. How is it to work with them? And then when you hear people like Jamie Dimon saying that Bitcoin is a fraud, you must have been working with likely similar people, even in your investors. So what's their feeling about Bitcoin, and how do you work with traditional finance?
Sure. And I want to maybe also discuss sort of the trading side of what we do, which I think is very related to that. So we need to connect the existing financial system with the crypto and blockchain world. And so that means connecting to the ledgers that exist in existing banks, and connecting to the overall centralized ledgers that governments run. So, the US dollar is a SQL database running on Oracle in a Java Solaris server in the Fed. That's actually what the dollar is. So that's like the master database, and then that database gets synchronized with other banks. That's done using FTP and comma delimited text files. So that's actually what money is. It's text files and FTP servers. And then, so we need to connect to those FTP servers and be able to access those records and store those records. But then ultimately we want to bridge that into blockchains and actually use blockchains as a more robust record-keeping system and as a more robust transaction settlement system than those old models. So to do that, we need to have government licenses to be able to access central bank money in the banking system, but we also need to have banking partners because we're not actually a bank. So we have banking partners in Europe, in the UK, we have banking partners in the US, We have banking partners that we trade currencies with. We don't disclose all of the banking partners that we work with, but in general, we have very good relationships with our banking partners because we're building a big business and we're driving a lot of revenue for them. And we have tried to build our product and our operations in a very compliant way. And so when they work with us, in some ways, they're almost like a mini regulator of us because they have rules they need to follow in any agency relationship that they have, and so we have to follow those rules. So I think we have a very good reputation. They come in and audit all of our risk and compliance systems and make sure we're doing everything correctly. So it's fine. I think we work well with that industry. I think the comment about Jamie Dimon. I think this whole arena of open, decentralized protocols for money, the idea that financial contracts are just governed by code, that things like equities or securities can be tokenized and exchanged and run over these networks. These are really hard things to understand for people who didn't grow up in the technology industry and didn't grow up with the internet. And I think when you're an established leader and you have a very specific worldview, which is the US dollar is JP Morgan, which is sort of how they think about the world, there's a kind of what I like to call cognitive dissonance that occurs, and it's very hard to synthesize that information and accept it, and so you get really angry and you lash out. And so I think that's what happens sometimes.
Makes sense.
Yeah, the trading piece we could talk about, which is, I think, yeah, so one of the things you were raising is sort of we have to move all these traditional forms of money around. So we need access to the fiat currencies, but if we want to, move, say, euro over a blockchain, we need to have Bitcoin or Ether in our system so that we can settle a transaction and transmit that transaction on the blockchain. So we built out in our operations a pretty sophisticated what we call treasury and trading operation, where we automate that liquidity between fiat currency and cryptocurrency. And we do that by having automated trading on all of the major crypto exchanges around the world. And then as the amount of transactions that we were doing grew, we needed to do more and more block trades. So we needed to do bigger blocks, hundreds of thousands of dollars in one transaction or millions of dollars in one transaction. So we started to do the over-the-counter trading. And that part of what we do, which was started out very automated, and then we built out this trading desk, that's really grown quite significantly. So we have Circle Pay, which is obviously this free service, and we have Circle Trading, which is another service that we offer. And we're actually this week talking more publicly about that. It hasn't been something we've publicly talked about, but if you go to circletrading.com, it's for accredited investors and institutional trading counterparties, so larger trading relationships. But we're now either the number one or the number two largest crypto asset trading organization in the whole world. In August, Circle Trading traded directly from our own balance sheet over $2 billion in crypto assets. So we're moving a lot of volume, and we're a major liquidity provider to the entire crypto asset ecosystem. And so it's just become a major business, and that's a major source of revenue for us. It also is helpful because we have a free service that's the case as well.
Yeah, that allows you to give this Circle experience to end users for free wherever in the world. Well, you said you've been inspired a lot by what happened in China, where digital money is more used, and about how integrated it is to messaging. So first, how did it inspire you? And second, I've seen that you raised money from some Chinese institutionals. Do you plan on launching there?
Yeah, I think even 4 years ago, or over 4 years ago, when we were just getting started, WeChat and Alipay were exploding, and they're social payments. That's a P2P and group social payments, and that whole behavior replaced bank accounts, replaced bank transfers, but became a really fundamental part of daily life and social interaction. And there are many reasons for that, but and I won't go through all of those here. but we were very inspired by that. And we said, okay, social payments, the ability to kind of exchange value this way is very, very much the user experience, the UX that belongs on top of blockchain infrastructure. If we want to move money around the same way we move content around, we need something like blockchain technology, but we need a user experience like WeChat and Alipay. And so we took inspiration from some of the user experience pieces. And you'll see, we'll do a demo in a little bit here, how we take some of that inspiration. We really believe in the social side of payments, that payment relationships and payments with people, and ultimately payments between people and businesses, are a kind of interaction that's supported by a conversational type of interface. So we were very inspired by that. We also, I think because we're in the blockchain technology space, blockchain is, despite the government ban on Bitcoin last week, there's an enormous amount of interest in blockchain in China, and enormous amount of interest at the central government. There's an enormous amount of interest in industry and from large companies and in the investment community. So we were, I think, fortunate to have a strong syndicate of strategic investors from China who wanted to invest in Circle, the global company. But we also, we definitely want to connect RMB, the Chinese yuan, into the kinds of systems that we're talking about. We think that there will be a cryptocurrency version of the RMB, and we think it will work over blockchains, and we think that we want that to be supported in a seamless way, so that if I send euro and you're in China and you use WeChat, that you could receive RMB and instantly receive it the same way you can share content. So we want that to be the case, and that's sort of, we're not planning to try and go compete with those companies in China, because that's not possible. But we definitely want those kinds of products to work in this open network. We want value sharing to work globally, and China's extremely important to that.
So what you said is you believe that China is going to have its own private blockchain to run its own currency, and that you want to interconnect with it. So you think that it's possible to have a country-only blockchain that runs a currency and not a global system?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the next step that you'll see this kind of, there'll be public blockchains with digital commodities that are the incentive system and the economic incentives and provide security, and those will be global settlement systems, and you'll build all kinds of things on top of those. But I think that the pattern of blockchains and crypto tokens as a mechanism to represent value, and a blockchain as a mechanism to record and audit value, that's something that smart central banks will embrace. We've been fortunate to be very familiar with things that are happening in China, and the People's Bank of China has a huge investment happening right now to do that, and that's public information. That's, you can go read all about it. And so I think they may be the first major economy to move to cryptocurrency as the native currency instead of the centralized ledgers that exist today.
Yeah, sorry, just one distinction is it's not really either or there, right? It's, you'd see these any kind of private permission chain as something that could connect to a public chain as well. So from a government perspective or a central bank perspective, if you already have a private version of a distributed ledger that's inefficient, then one of the sort of modest things that a blockchain sort of implementation could get you is a more transparent, less corruptible form of moving money around, even internally in a permission chain. That's not to say that it wouldn't necessarily connect to other chains or other fiat systems at the same time. It's just a better way to represent RMB, particularly from a capital controls perspective. If a government were to be interested in that, then they can look at things like the delivery of the money supply could be capped in a way that is enforced in code rather than just through human policy, and it could be controlled. The interactions with other kinds of blockchains and other kinds of, whether they're fiat currencies or cryptocurrencies, could be somewhat monitored. And so that's something that would be, you could imagine being of interest to a central bank in a certain kind of a government. So I think that's sort of the general area that we're talking about. I think China is a really interesting place because it's not, whenever we start talking about it, it sounds as if they're a generation ahead. I don't know that that's the case. I think they're sort of 5 or 6 years ahead of a lot of us in the West. And maybe some of the behaviors don't necessarily translate linearly Certainly WeChat hasn't exactly caught on in the rest of the world, and a lot of that has to do with a very interesting user experience that works well in China, as massively successful as it is there, where it's like a de facto operating system, not even really like an app. It's just sort of, it's like iOS. It's the thing that everyone uses. And from a financial perspective, they sort of skipped past cards and cash now just to use WeChat or Ali at point of sale everywhere. And so, that's not to say that that will just linearly map to exactly what we'll see in France or elsewhere, but the idea of using mobile behaviors and money as a first-class citizen in those environments, just like a photo or a text, it's not a special utility thing that you jump through hoops to exercise. It's just another kind of content, first-class content on the web. I think that's the thing that sticks.
Here in France, we still don't have Apple Pay because we have the legacy bank Visa equivalent called Carte Bleue. So it can take some time, but I agree with most of it. One question about Circle. Where do you see both the trading part and the end consumer part in a couple of years?
Do you want to talk about that? Yeah, so I think, today, obviously, we have trading behind the scenes. When I send money or you send money, we send money through Circle. Our banks don't work that quickly. So the settlement through the banking system isn't immediate, but Circle needs to make it immediate. So we need to have liquidity in all the currencies that we support. So we have to have euros, we have to have dollars, sterling, Bitcoin, Ethereum, and other crypto assets as those become useful in the system. So we trade those to make sure that customers can execute payments quickly, and then we settle with the bank separately after the fact. So you can think of the payment that occurs in Circle almost like a credit decision. So when I try to send you money, Circle needs to decide, am I worth the credit risk of making that payment immediately, knowing that I may be a fraudster or I may have been attempting to steal Jeremy's identity or whatever it may be. So Circle makes that decision really quickly and then has to have the money on hand. So we have to trade in those currencies and stay liquid in all of those currencies. We also trade separately to increase the value of the crypto assets in the marketplace, which is one way that we can make this payment experience completely free for customers. So we do generate revenue from that practice. So that's how they're connected today. I think in the future, we want to extend past payments alone. Payments is the initial consumer product that we're releasing. But we would like to see a global set of financial services exist that, and not just from Circle, but from a number of players in the ecosystem that do things like credit and lending. And if you start a business in France, why can't you receive a loan from someone in China? New kinds of savings accounts, and also wealth management. And some of that sort of area, I think, is particularly ripe for a robust crypto asset trading practice, which we have at Circle.
So in that marketplace of financial services for the end consumer, what kind of services really benefit from being global and open? I can see the lending part.
Yeah, so today, value is very constrained. It's constrained by country, by currency. It's constrained with choices that you as a consumer don't make yourself. You rely on a proxy, like a bank, to make those decisions for you. If, as a consumer, you had the ability to make decisions about how your money is used more directly, and if the value that you hold as a consumer is part of a global interoperable system of value exchange, that can have software-based rules for how value is dispersed or collected or used, smart contracts, that really opens up radical new ways to build models for savings and lending that allow consumers to have radically more control over how their money is used, and interoperability globally, so that, as Sean said, if you're creating a small business in France, why can't capital be pooled from 15 different currencies from people who are making decisions about what they think is interesting for the use of their savings. And likewise, if you are a consumer or a business and you need to borrow value for some need, to be able to access those pools of capital much more intelligently in a more automated way, where you have more control and where there isn't, a 10 or 15 or 20 or 30% interest rate that you're having to pay, but maybe it's more free because moving value around becomes free. So I think there are some really radical things that can happen to how those fundamental aspects of how your money is used works. And those are the things that are really interesting for us over the long run. I think in the short run, just looking at digital assets today, crypto assets today, are the highest performing asset class in the world for 2 years straight. And there's an enormous amount of innovation in capital formation that's happening with that. And mainstream consumers would like to have really easy ways to invest in digital assets. And so that's an area, given what we do with Circle Trading, given the consumer product capability that we have, that's an area we're really interested in, is how do we make crypto assets and digital assets something that can be invested in a really safe, simple, easy way for the average person, and that hasn't really been solved yet.
Given how cautious you've been with regulation and being top-notch in that field, would you let users invest in ICOs today if they had to do it through Circle? Given the state of ICOs?
Would we let users invest in ICOs today if we had to do that through Circle? It's an interesting question. I think when you look at crypto tokens, you have like what people call the beta tokens, which would be like the core commodities like Bitcoin or Ether or Litecoin or other kind of currency blockchains. And then you have a huge spectrum of other types of tokens. You have tokenized protocols that are for things like, decentralized supercomputing, or tokenized protocols that are used for identity verification like Civic. So you have kind of protocols that have tokens that are really intrinsic to the utility of that technology. And those are really interesting, and those are clearly things that consumers will want to be able to invest in. And then you kind of move down the spectrum to what is really an equity, which is a kind of investment in a business, and it's a form of shares in a sense. It's a form of voting power, even potentially literally through smart contracts. And so as you move into those are securities. There's new regulation in the United States about ICOs and about crypto tokens. And if your token really behaves like an equity and not actually as a protocol that is and an API token, but really is more like an equity, then it's treated as a security. And in order to create a marketplace for those, you have to be regulated as a national securities exchange. And so that's new rules that exist in the US. And so I think in the future you'll see crypto exchanges that are regulated, but through that would allow consumers to invest in potentially tens or even hundreds of thousands of different types of crypto tokens. And so our view is that every form of property in the world will become tokenized and tradable and leverageable. And so we live in Boston, there's a lot of snow. So in my neighborhood, we have a snow blower to move the snow. But if you had a cryptographic token for a personal property item and you could share it and be paid for it and have a contract for that, tokenized property and other things, lots of things could be traded this way. So in the very long term, we think that token marketplaces people will invest in all kinds of assets that way.
You use the word leverage. Today, it's completely impossible to do leverage on the blockchain, right?
Leverage is specifically just allowing someone to borrow against an asset. So you lock up the asset for a period of time in order to let someone else use it. So that's certainly possible.
Cool.
You can't create new coin from thin air.
No. Before we jump to questions, do you have any advice for people starting a company either in blockchain tech or in very heavily regulated markets?
I just one more point on some of the things that Jeremy was saying and that you were asking about token sales. I think there's obviously a role for marketplaces and to make the sort of evolution of crowdfunding and equity raises in general in the venture world simpler and more accessible to more people globally. But a key, maybe a little level lower. I think a key critical piece is that these token sales and a lot of equity sales, and I think the evolution of the model as it begins to mirror more of what we have seen in the past in venture capital, in the sense that small round, achieve a milestone, raise more money. If the consensus is the milestone is achieved, go into growth mode, and that sort of staged, series of classic fundraising moves into the sort of token sale realm. Then all of these things get encoded in contracts that are mostly open source code. So one means of making that more accessible is just an increase in basic core technical literacy, not teaching everyone how to be programmers, but if contract code is no longer written in English or French and interpreted by a legal system, but is software code, then more people need to be able to understand how to read that code. And we're still in a little bit of a dark ages where no one can read yet, so we need to go to priests to tell us what is written. Software engineers are sort of those priests. But I think with things like smart contract code and fundraising, more people just need to be able to understand what is being offered. And then they can directly invest in those things using technology, not necessarily going to a gatekeeper, whether it's Circle or any other gatekeeper. And that's really powerful and exciting. So that's sort of on that piece. Advice for navigating heavily regulated industries. I think it's really interesting because it's one of the interesting new waves of major innovation that's happening today. Whether it's autonomous vehicles or the kinds of things that we're doing, is figuring out how do you navigate the regulatory environment. And there's a bunch of different sort of emerging practices for it. But as an entrepreneur, I think one of the things is just when you found a business, you want to be careful about the people who you bring onto your board and who your partners are, and you deliberately seek the things that you feel like you need, whether that be networking, whether that be mentorship, access to capital. In this case, it's making sure that you have if you are not yourself that person who's tied into that world, it's making sure that you have that leadership represented in your company and on your board, and that you actively go seek that, knowing that even though you don't know what you don't know, you are aware that this is an area that needs to be tackled. And so deliberately seeking that kind of expertise early on, I think, is one of the things that is different versus creating, say, a game or a publishing portal, because those things are regulated so differently.
Great. Do you have one also? So before we jump to questions, you should all note that you have to learn how to code if you want to be able to make any investment in the 5-year future. So questions?
Yeah, I have a quick question on what's you guys' take on privacy. So I know one of the big things that kind of launched Bitcoin was like buying drugs on the internet. That's kind of like the first use case, just because it was anonymous. You have services that started building things to hide your private key, and that shut down recently because they thought that it was being used for like drug dealing, etc. Do you think that this is kind of like a temporary thing for blockchain, that people are kind of using it on the short term and having all these privacy concerns, or do you think it's just something that's going to go away in the long term as people do with their credit cards and everything?
So you can answer that, but I want to just, I like that question a lot. Thanks for asking it. I want to do a little bit of a level set, though, on the existing financial system, because a lot of people aren't aware that financial institutions, banks, have to acquire a lot of our personally identifiable information and then have it accessible to their own competitors as well as law enforcement under threat of subpoena. And so they collect quite a lot of information and yet have, heinous activities flow through the traditional financial system. We would see things in Bitcoin that are mostly related to someone is buying pot brownies on the internet. Okay, regulators don't like that, but it's not heinous, immoral sort of crimes that financial institutions see. So the scale of what we see and the kinds of protections that we've been able to afford in the crypto world, I think, has been sterling, relative to what we see in the traditional financial system. That's not to say that we can't make big improvements and that we don't have ways to go, because a completely anonymized system for transferring funds isn't something that regulators are going to ultimately allow at scale. So there obviously needs to be some solution there. But for some perspective, I think the financial system that we have today has had massive failures in privacy leakage while still not policing against the terrible things that flow through the system.
I would add to that, just also, thank you for the question. Blockchain tech and crypto can make huge improvements in privacy protection possible at scale. So there are all these projects that are now launching kind of identity blockchain, infrastructures. But think about the model, which is, be your own bank, which is the motto with something like Bitcoin, where you have the money yourself and you control that yourself. And if you have the private key, you can have control over where your funds can go, et cetera. But the same concept and the same fundamental infrastructure can be applied to identity as well. So you can have your own digital wallet of identity attributes. You can publish a public key, which allows authorized institutions, businesses you do business with, the driver's license bureau, to be able to essentially write attributes to your wallet that are attributes of you, but only you have the ability to control with permission, where different attributes of your identity can be used. And so there is a self-sovereign identity movement. There's a lot of synergies between the self-sovereign identity movement and blockchain tech and crypto, and I think it's very powerful. And I think if money was one of the missing layers of the internet, identity is one of the other missing layers of the internet, and I think crypto is getting us to a place where we can solve both. And then related to what Sean just said, when you make a payment, say with a credit card or something like that, basically that personal identifiable information that your bank has about you, they transmit it everywhere. They share it with everyone. So your PII is getting proliferated constantly all around the world into largely insecure databases. And when these breaches happen, those breaches affect that, and it exposes your PII. So the current financial system is extremely vulnerable to privacy intrusion, far more vulnerable than a crypto-based model. And things like multi-sig in crypto make it possible to create mechanisms for financial institutions to be able to make assertions about identities and have multiple signature encryptions of PII that only say could be decrypted if there was a subpoena from law enforcement, but which would not require that PII to be proliferating everywhere. And those are innovations that are not just now becoming possible, and crypto is actually leading the way in terms of how we can solve for some of those financial privacy issues.
You talked an awful lot about your trading operations that's going on, and we know that Bitcoin has a lot of problems with volatility. Do you see that your trading operations may help level out some of the volatility in these cryptocurrencies?
Yeah, so I think we manage our trading desk as a professional trading desk, so we're constantly hedging risk. So we're very careful about what long positions we maintain in any one place. And for the most part, we don't keep a lot of long positions, particularly on exchanges that we don't custody, ourselves. But we are market makers. We do affect we have a global impact on the price. And I'd like to think that our impact is very positive, because clearly we need this to be a healthy market to build all of the things that we want to build. So I think leveling out, it is very volatile. Leveling it out, that might be too strong a word to use at this point on our trading desk, but we certainly don't expose any customers to any kind of volatility. So that if there is, say, a send of €1 that goes through a partner that it turns into Bitcoin so that it can turn into Korean won on the other side, those customers are not impacted by any volatility should it occur while the payment is in transit. So certainly from that perspective, we managed to level it out.
I also have a question regarding the trading. How do you handle volatility? I mean, do you use one of the existing stablecoins like USDT or Tether? And if not, what do you think of those stablecoins?
So, I mean, we trade with fiat and crypto, so we have a large treasury of all the major fiat currencies, so we don't need to rely on a tethered coin for fiat. So we certainly leverage the stability of fiat to hedge out of risk in crypto all the time. That's a constant thing that we do. And really, Sean, I think, answered the other part of the question, which is we don't take long positions in crypto. We view ourselves as a liquidity provider to the marketplace, and so that's usually intraday liquidity that we're providing for large-scale transactions, and we're able to hedge that pretty effectively and profitably.
So currently, you wouldn't need a stablecoin for your business, but what do you think of those? Do you think they're useless? Do you think they're...
No, I think, I don't think I understand the phrase stablecoin and why it's a concept. I think fiat tokens makes a ton of sense. I think that every fiat currency in the world should be a crypto token and should be tethered, if you want to use that phrase, in a 100% reserve model by legit financial intermediaries that can attest to that with auditors. That's interesting, and I think we're going to see a lot more of that, because the benefits of instant transmission, exchange, et cetera, of fiat in a tokenized fashion is tremendous. So I think that'll be one of the things we see a lot more of in the next year, is fiat tokens that are from issuing institutions that are legitimate and that people can trust, because you ultimately are trusting the multiple layers when you do that. But I think it's a really powerful mechanism, and we'll see a lot more of it.
Thanks. And so one last question. What do you think of the company Omise and the recently launched Omise Go? Do you see them as competitors or in general?
We know Omise Go. I think you know, it's not a consumer product, right? And it's not a trading operation, so it doesn't compete with Circle. That infrastructure problem of which is what they're working on, I think is really interesting. There are a number of different takes on that exist. None have really taken hold in terms of actual adoption, but I think that model is a very compelling one, and I think, you know, there'll be more things like that, and we'll see some really interesting traction for some of those in the next couple of years.
Hello, I've got two questions. One concerns the regulatory aspect. As far as I know, in France, the emitters of electronic money can only hold 1,000 euros of electronic money per customer. So how do you tackle that? And second question is, since there is no face-to-face encounter when opening an account with you, how do you prevent, for example, people, for example, if I got a friend, he can let me his credit card, his name, his passport, I can take his picture and really pretend I'm him. How do you prevent such cases?
Yes, maybe I'll take the second one and you can chime in on the first one. Yeah, I think it's a good question. So our risk practice has certainly improved over the years now to the point where we're pretty good about understanding whether somebody has taken a picture of a picture, or whether this is, you know, if we need, so, you know, the process may be take a picture of your passport, then take a selfie of yourself, and we need to make sure that the person who was holding that passport does indeed look like the person who gave us the picture. So we're pretty good about understanding whether that selfie is really a legitimate person that was taken in real time, or if it was a picture of a picture. And there are a number of different data points involved in that. We don't necessarily make a decision solely on that, though. So that's one of the factors that goes into the overall decision-making process about whether we think that this may be an account takeover attempt, or it may be a stolen card, or something of that nature. So we take a look at that IDV, as well as things like device information, social graph information, financial velocity information. We may ultimately not be able to make a decision quickly, even with all that data, and we may have to follow up with an interaction, which would be, you know, a human being reaches out to the customer and says something to the effect that everything is probably fine and this is incredibly inconvenient, apologize profusely, but we may need a little bit more information to make sure that you are in fact who you say you are and that we can protect your account.
That's right. Yeah, and the first piece, I mean, we're regulated as an e-money issuer, and that means that we have to follow all of the rules around stored value and payment size and data collection and collateral and all the things that go into that. So we don't have a sneaky way to get around that, but that is the rules that we have to follow.
You explained a bit of information about what you are not, and also what you will be. Still, I don't know exactly how you operate today, but still my limited understanding is that it involves liquidity in cryptocurrency trading. So my question is, given that liquidity is quite limited today in comparison with what banks can do, how big can you go? How big can you grow? Today you are doing consumer to consumer. What about company to company? Is it too big? Is there enough liquidity?
I can answer a piece of that. So I think, you know, the question overall is how is the limited liquidity in crypto a gating factor for operating at scale? So I guess there are a couple of different points to that. It is still relatively small globally speaking. We're in a good position because we happen to be one of the largest liquidity providers to the market that does exist, either, as Jeremy said earlier, number one or number two. So we're plugged in both on the fiat side and crypto side to enormous amounts of liquidity. However, it's not a one-to-one mapping in the sense that every single transaction equates to some need to be liquid in a cryptocurrency. Because of the way that the system works, not every single transaction is ended up minted, so to speak, on a distributed ledger. So there are other technologies, such as, you know, something called state channels, for example, for executing a very high number of transactions very, very quickly, and minting beginning state and end state to the blockchain, which does require liquidity, but the intermediary transactions may not. So it's sort of a combination of global liquidity is growing. We're in a really good position there ourselves. It's not big enough. In fact, sometimes people are surprised by how relatively small it is, but it is growing. And then secondly, it's not necessarily one-to-one, so it's not a huge gating factor right now in terms of the kinds of the products that we're building.
And related to one of the last questions, we expect more and more kind of digital wallet architectures that are using blockchain to use tethered fiat tokens as the underlying currency unit that's being transmitted or exchanged. And so that model requires that there be liquidity in those fiat pairs, not necessarily in a fiat to Bitcoin or fiat to Ether pair. And so that, I think, is a shift that will take place where that becomes less of an issue as well. But excellent. Well, we want to have some folks come up and do a demo, but first maybe just say thanks.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Bonsoir, bien consciente d'être la dernière chose entre vous et les drinks, donc on va faire vite. Marik, je suis la directrice générale pour Circle pour l'Europe, et Thomas, le responsable France. L'application Circle que vous pouvez dès aujourd'hui installer en français sur vos téléphones. Très simplement, ce que vous pouvez faire, c'est envoyer des pounds. Moi, je suis en pounds puisque je suis basée à Londres. Des pounds, des euros ou des dollars. Vous pouvez faire ça au mid-market rate, donc il n'y a absolument aucun frais, aucune commission. Si par exemple je veux envoyer, on va dire, je vais être généreuse avec Thomas, un pound. Voilà, je vais essayer de trouver Thomas. Voilà, et je peux rajouter un petit message en lui disant pour une bière. Voilà. Je peux rajouter un petit GIF. On peut rajouter des photos, ou bien vous pouvez rajouter aussi des GIFs qui sont très populaires. Voilà, donc je peux appuyer sur continuer et j'envoie le pound sécurisé. J'ai mis mon Touch ID. Et Thomas va récupérer le pound. Avec Circle, ce que vous pouvez faire aussi, c'est demander de l'argent. Donc, je peux demander en fait 2 pounds à Thomas. Voilà, et donc je peux lui dire rends-moi mon argent de la même façon, pareil, GIF, image, tout ce qui va bien avec. On va vous montrer un nouveau feature en fait qu'on n'a pas encore lancé, mais qui va bientôt être disponible. On a créé une fonction qui en fait est une fonction groupe. Donc là, en fait, on a créé un groupe dans lequel il y a Sean, il y a Jérémy et il y a Thomas. Voilà, donc pareil, de la même façon. Donc Jérémy, lui, est en US dollars, donc je peux lui demander, allez, on va être sneaky, 2 pounds. Et je peux continuer, en fait, dans le groupe en racontant la même chose ou éventuellement en faisant aussi un don à Thomas. Voilà, 1 pound. Vous voyez sur Circle, je peux choisir si j'envoie directement depuis le solde que j'ai dans Circle ou bien depuis ma carte. Les deux sont sans frais, aucun frais pour les consommateurs. Et le tout est sécurisé avec tout ce qui est Touch ID. Et voilà. Donc ça, c'est une fonction groupe qui n'est pas encore disponible, que nous allons lancer dans les jours prochains, qui marchera sur Android, sur iOS. Là, la démonstration que vous avez, on est tous les deux sur iOS, mais l'application est également disponible sur Android. Voilà, donc ça c'est pour le lancement de Circle en France. Et merci encore beaucoup d'être venus aussi nombreux pour ce soir.
Que la famille.